Hey there, Jake here from CVP. Over the past few years, a huge range of affordable anamorphic lenses have been released, and now creatives wanting to shoot anamorphic have loads of options to choose from. However, anamorphic zoom lenses are still pretty hard to come by, and what's even more rare are 2x anamorphic zooms that you can comfortably operate handheld by yourself. Well, today we are taking a look at a couple of exciting new lenses from Laowa. These are the Proteus Zooms, and they offer an incredibly unique combination of features. But how do they perform? Let's take a look. In the grand scheme of cinema optics, there have really only been a few 2x anamorphic zoom lenses throughout the years. But when it comes to more modern optics, there really aren't many at all. In early 2024, Laowa released their Nanomorph Zooms, which have a 1.5x anamorphic squeeze. But what they have achieved with these 2x versions is arguably more impressive and interesting. Different anamorphic lenses can have their anamorphic block placed in different positions throughout the lens. This is commonly referred to as front, middle, or rear anamorphic, and they can all yield different images as a result. However, front anamorphic is commonly associated as the one that people desire, as it often results in the most amount of anamorphic character versus the other two. So what makes these lenses even more unique is that their anamorphic block is front mounted, which given their price and size is pretty crazy. The two zooms we have with us today consist of a 26-45mm and 45-85mm, both of which have a maximum aperture of t2.9. And these ones we have with us are early production copies that Laowa sent to us to evaluate. These are pretty short zooms, but given that they are 2x anamorphic, their size and weight, it's not too surprising to see. It is enough though to be able to reframe quickly if you need to, and you'll still be able to get some nice smooth zooming motion with the right kit sat around them. With these lenses being 2x anamorphic, it means that the 26-45mm has a spherical equivalent horizontal field of view of 13-22.5mm, and the 45-85mm is 22.5-42.5, but the vertical field of view stays at the denoted focal length on the lens. 13mm on the wide is crazy, and it means at 26mm you can really get quite a unique look, especially at close focus. The 45-85mm is a much more general focal range compared to the wider lens. One of the most impressive things with the Proteus Zooms is how incredibly compact and light they are. They both weigh around 1.5 kilograms each, and are very compact given that they are 2x anamorphic zooms, which can get notoriously large and heavy as they can have some pretty complex lens structures. Even compared to Laowa's Proteus Primes, we can see just how much smaller the zooms are, though the Primes are T2. This stoppish difference in aperture does make a difference to the image, but most anamorphics do require being stopped down to at least T4 for acceptable center sharpness. This difference in size means that you can shoot with them easier in different environments than you traditionally would with a 2x anamorphic lens. We shot with them on a couple of cameras using a basic SAC for camera support, and the lens is handled really nicely in these more run and gun style scenarios. Both lenses have an 80mm front diameter, which means you'll be able to easily use clamp-on matte boxes, and they also have a 77mm filter thread if you want to use screw-on filters, which will be helpful for some configurations. The lenses both have the same geared rings across focus, iris and zoom, which are in the same position across them both, so you can easily swap lenses without having to change your motor's position. The focus throw is 270 degrees and the zoom throw is 100 degrees, and this means that you can be nice and detailed with your control. As with plenty of Laowa's other lenses, the Proteus Zooms come PL mount as standard with EF included in the box as well. You can also grab RF, Sony E, Nikon Z and L mount if you'd rather use any of those. But really for anamorphic lenses like this, PL is what I recommend and really what most will be using on these lenses. Oh yeah, and the mount is also user interchangeable so you can swap these out yourself. The Proteus Zooms have a rated image circle of 31.9mm, which for Super 35 lenses is pretty standard. When we first viewed them on our projector, it was interesting seeing how much the image circles change as you zoom. So as we normally do, we captured our regular coverage examples using our normal methodology so we can add them onto our comprehensive lens tool. For these examples, we are showing the full image of the Venice 2's 8K 3x2 open gate mode, and then the subframe guide is the Alexa Mini's 4x3 2.8K mode. Starting with the wide zoom at 26mm, we can see that across close focus and infinity at t2.9 and 4, there is some hard vignette in the corners. Zooming into 30mm, we can see the hard vignette is much better wide open, and this gets better as you stop down. As we go through the zoom from here, we can see that the coverage improves quite a bit. At 45mm, coverage is really good, covering almost the full 3x2 frame, which is pretty impressive. Illumination in the center of the frame is good across the range though. On the 45 to 85mm at 45mm, there's a touch of hard vignette, which improves as we stop down to T4. At 50mm, you can see a touch of fall off towards the corners, which again improves as you stop down. From 60mm onwards, it covers our Alexa Mini frame well, and as we zoom from here, the coverage gets really good at 85mm, where again it nearly covers the entire Venice 2 frame. With these lenses, I think it's pretty important to check how they cover your chosen camera and format. So if you want to see exactly how these lenses cover your chosen camera and format, head over to our lens coverage and camera comparison tool, link to which is in the description below. If you want to use these lenses on larger formats, you can actually use them with Laowa's 1.4x expander. Right, let's take a look at some chart testing, starting with how parfocal these lenses are. A cine zoom lens being parfocal throughout its range is a key part of what makes a zoom lens ready for video and cine productions. Unfortunately, both of these lenses perform very well in this regard. These examples are focused at their tele ends and then zoomed out from there, and we can see very little shift throughout their range. This is great to see. Unfortunately, if you have any issues with back focus with your copies of these lenses, they actually have a built-in back focus adjustment at the rear of the lens, which is very handy to have and can save you from needing to shim them manually. Focus breathing is pretty common to see in anamorphic lenses, and often something that people actually like. The disproportionate breathing that anamorphics can have gives their focusing a unique feel compared to spherical lenses. So let's take a look at how the Proteus Zooms look. For these examples, we are putting focus through the entire range, so this will look far more exaggerated than a real-world regular pull. Starting with the wider lens at 26mm, we can see that breathing is decently controlled. As we zoom, we can see that performance actually improves with it, exhibiting the least amount of breathing at 45mm. Looking at the longer zoom, we can see that it exhibits quite a bit more than the shorter zoom. Overall though, I think the Proteus Zooms strike a nice balance of having some breathing, but not too much. I've seen 2x anamorphics with far more breathing than these, and that can be a bit more polarizing, whereas I think this level of performance will be more liked by more filmmakers. Right, let's take a look at how these lenses can resolve our chart. For these examples, we are using our Blackmagic Ursa Cine 12K in 12K 3x2, and moving the camera further away from the chart to try and match framing as much as possible as we zoom. We framed using the 9K 6x5 mode of this camera, which we've overlaid a graphic for over the full 12K image. Starting with the 26 to 45, it performs decently consistently throughout its range. In the center, it isn't super sharp wide open, but stopping down does improve it quite substantially. So if you want a detailed image, stopping down to 5.6 gives you good results. In the corners, this is still the case, though it does have a touch of spherical aberration creep in towards the longer focal lengths, though this does go away when stopped down to 5.6. We can also see clear color aberration in the corners, but thankfully the center of frame is decently clean throughout. Looking at the 45 to 85, we can see immediately at 45mm, it's a bit better than the 26 to 45 at 45mm. Again though, at 45mm in the center, we can see the lens really improving as we stop down to 5.6, where it resolves well. Towards the corners, we can see again it improves as we stop down, and color aberration which is present even as we stop down as well. As we zoom through the range, we can see that center performance actually does drop off a little bit towards the longer focal lengths, but again stopping down to 5.6 really improves resolving power. In the corners, we can actually see color aberration reduced even wide open, which is good. Needing to stop down to get better sharpness and a cleaner image with 2x anamorphic lenses is pretty common. And the Proteus Zooms are actually quite usable wide open, but can produce nice detailed imagery when stopped down to 5.6. When it comes to close focus, the 26 to 45 has a minimum focus of 1 foot 7 inches or 50 centimeters, which is similar to Laowa's 28mm Proteus Prime, and the 45 to 85mm has a minimum focus of 2 foot 11 inches or 90 centimeters, which is similar to the 85mm Proteus Prime. These close focuses aren't amazing in spherical terms, but longer close focuses are pretty common with 2x anamorphic lenses. One way around this is to use some kind of diopter, which, given the Proteus's excellent size and small front diameter, will be pretty easy to do. I would love to try the Lindsay Optics brilliant macro adapter, which actually holds a lens's parfocalness when zooming, which not many diopters can do. If you want to keep up with the latest and greatest kit, please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And if you want to buy anything you see in this video, or want to get your hands on these new lenses, or any other kit for that matter, head over to cvp.com, where our experienced team is waiting to help you. Distortion profiles of anamorphic lenses are arguably one of the most spoken about aspects of them online, and that's been no different with the Proteus Zooms. Looking at our distortion grid through the lenses, we can see that the 28-45 has some barrel distortion horizontally and pincushion vertically towards the corners. The pincushion stays consistent throughout the range, but the barrel distortion does get less pronounced. On the 45-85, we can see slightly better performance with less pin and more barrel distortion. At 50mm, the barreling is well controlled, and then from here, this horizontal distortion turns to pincushion overall. Distortion can change across the focus range, so I've made sure to put the focus positions on these examples. The clear pincushion distortion here will be divisive. There'll be a lot of people who wish these lenses had the commonly preferred barrel distortion made popular by Panavision's anamorphic lenses. But there have been popular anamorphic lenses before with pincushion, such as some of Cooke's offerings. As always, all lens characters are personal preference, and a balance of different compromises. So whether this is a deal breaker or not is down to you really. And if you love everything else about these lenses, this is something you can correct in post. When it comes to bokeh, both zooms have an 11 blade iris and a maximum aperture of t2.9, which means you can get some nicely shallow imagery with that elliptical shape that is part of that signature anamorphic aesthetic. Looking at our controlled headshot examples, we can have a look at how our autofocus highlights look throughout the two lenses. Starting at the wide zoom throughout the range, we can see a pretty consistent set of characteristics. Shape is decent wide open, but throughout the range we can see a bit of weird shaping wide open towards the corners, though this does improve towards the telly end. Wide open we can also see a touch of colour around our highlights, which again improves as you stop down to 5.6, where it looks far better controlled. I think stopping down to T4 actually results in a good balance of shape and colour, whereas wide open it can look a little bit funky. The longer lens has similar characteristics. It has good shape in the centre of the frame, which gets a bit weird towards the corners, but this can be helped by stopping down. We can also see a touch of colour around the highlights throughout the zoom range, and this persists even when stopped down to 5.6. It's good that they look very similar, as this means you'll be able to intercut them very nicely. They definitely do have that anamorphic depth of field quality that people lust after. Though, in some of the creative examples with high contrast areas, we can see our autofocus areas showing a lot of colour aberration that we saw in these controlled examples. This is a pretty common thing to have though in anamorphic lenses, and overall I like the look they produce. Flare is a very important part of that anamorphic look. The horizontal flare paired with other interesting subflares can really add a little cinematic pop to your image. As with Laowa's other anamorphic lenses, they are available with 3 different colour flares: blue, amber and silver, with the silvers being the ones we have with us. The silver flare takes on the colour of the light source creating the flare, which I think is going to be the most versatile. Looking at our controlled flare examples, we can see that the lenses are slightly different to each other. The flare on the 26-45 is much more pronounced than the 45-85. It's much wider, though this does improve as you stop down. I personally prefer the flare on the 45-85 because of this. It looks a bit more subtle and more akin to other anamorphics that I love. Both lenses' flares are pretty complex as well, especially in the centre of the frame, which I think can be a bit overwhelming at points. But overall, they definitely do have that anamorphic look to them. What do you think of the flares? Let us know in the comments. We thought it would be quite interesting to see how the Proteus Zooms compared to a few of the Proteus Prime lenses. Unfortunately, we had a 35, 60 and 85mm in for us to test, all of which are silver flare as well. So for these tests, we shot the primes wide open and then stopped them down to 2.8, 4 and 5.6, where we can compare it to the zooms. T2 can be very helpful to have, and the Proteus primes look surprisingly sharp wide open. This is actually quite surprising for 2x anamorphic primes, which often require being stopped down to get acceptable sharpness. Comparing the 35mm prime to our wide zoom at 35mm, we can see that the character is very similar. The autofocus highlights have pretty much the same shape and colour fringing and texture, and only ever so slightly different shape. I think the zoom has a slightly better looking shape towards the corners of the frame. Comparing the 45-85mm and the 60mm prime, we can see that they are even closer to each other, with again very minor differences. At 85mm, we can see a bit of a difference between them. If we look at the edges of our autofocus highlights, we can see that the zoom has more colour fringing around our highlights than the prime. However, overall, I do think the zoom produces better shaped highlights with less hard lines from the iris than the primes do. If we compare the flares of these lenses to the Proteus primes, I do think the 45 to 85mm matches them better than the wider zoom. Looking at the 3 focal lengths we tested anyway, I prefer the way the primes flare. They don't have the complex center flares and have a slightly more pleasing colour to them as well. These are subtle differences, and really the takeaway is that they are very similar, which means you'll be able to intercut them well, which given the large size and price difference is actually very impressive. Looking at our aberration tests, we can see that the wide lens wide open has clear transverse aberration throughout its focal range. It's orangey pink before and bluey greeny after our point of focus. Wide open, we can also see a bit of spherical aberration, which comes in towards the tally end. Stopping down to T4 improves spherical and colour aberration quite a lot, so if you want to run this lens a little cleaner, stopping down to 4 or 5/6 is a good idea. Looking at the 45 to 85mm wide open, we can again see pinky purple aberration before and greeny blue after our point of focus, and spherical aberration again, with both getting more pronounced towards the telly end. Stopping down again makes a substantial difference, especially at 5.6 where the lens cleans up. The Laowa Proteus Zooms are a pretty unique proposition, and technologically an impressive achievement. They offer a solid image with plenty of anamorphic characteristics, but I think the big unique selling point of these lenses is their size and weight, which are very impressive for 2x front-mounted anamorphic zoom lenses. This means that they are far easier to handle for smaller crews and solo operators compared to other 2x anamorphic lenses, including primes. Super 35 is still a very popular format, but full frame certainly has been adopted pretty widely across the filmmaking and content industry, so their coverage and the limitations of anamorphic formats on these full frame cameras will limit their appeal for some people. Though, as we mentioned earlier, you'll be able to use them with Laowa's 1.4x expander for larger formats if you do want to. But for those with a camera that can really get the most out of them and wanting that 2x look, they do offer a pretty impressive value proposition. You can buy these lenses separately at these prices, or together at these prices. And this means that you can save quite a bit by buying them together. Given what these lenses offer and pricing on other 2x anamorphic lenses, I think the pricing's pretty good. And really, there's nothing else really like them. So if they sound like they could be the perfect lens for your next project, I've put links to our website down below. Anyway, let us know what you think of the Proteus Zooms, and if you have any further questions about them in the comments below. And if you like the video, please give it a like and maybe consider subscribing so you don't miss out on our awesome upcoming content. And thank you so much for watching.